My name is Daniel. I am 42 years old. This story is about my life. I am a quiet man who lost his wife and learned to live with silence. What you heard is my story, told from my heart. I live near the river where the water moves slow and gray, and I work in a small place that fixes old watches. And every day I sit alone at the wooden table and listen to the ticking sounds around me, and the rain often taps on the window like it wants to come inside. And I let it because I feel the same way, always waiting, always quiet, always tired in a way sleep cannot fix. And people think I am calm, but really I am empty. And I learned how to live with that emptiness after my wife died 3 years ago. Not in a loud way, not in a sudden way, but in a slow hospital room with white walls and machines that made soft sounds. And I held her hand and felt it get colder while I tried to remember her warmth. And after she was gone, the world did not break. It just became thinner, like paper, and everything passed through me. And I kept going, because stopping felt harder. And every morning I opened the shop, cleaned the glass, fixed the tiny gears, ate my lunch alone, closed the door, went home, and sat in silence. And sometimes I talked to the walls because they listen better than people. And then one afternoon, during heavy rain, she came in, and I did not notice her at first because I was focused on a broken clock. But then the bell rang softly, and I looked up, and she stood there with wet hair and a coat too thin for the weather. And she did not smile. She just stood and waited, and I liked that because I was tired of smiles. And she placed a watch on the table, and her hands shook a little, and she said it stopped working. And her voice was quiet, like mine. And I nodded and took the watch, and our fingers touched for a second, and something small moved inside me. Not joy, not pain, just awareness, like waking up in the dark. And I fixed the watch while she waited, and the rain got louder. And time felt slow but not heavy, and when I finished, I gave it back. And she thanked me and paid and left, and the bell rang again, and the shop felt empty in a new way. And I told myself it was nothing, just a customer, just a moment. And that night, I sat by the window and watched the rain, and thought of nothing. But her face stayed in my mind like a quiet sound that would not stop. And days passed, and she did not come back, and I returned to my routine. And then one evening, she came again, and this time she brought the watch already working, and she said she just wanted to be sure, and I checked it, and it was fine, and we stood there not talking, and I could feel the space between us, not big, not small, just present, and she looked around the shop like she wanted to remember it. And then she asked how long I had worked there. And I told her many years, and she nodded. And then she asked if I liked the rain, and I said yes, because it makes things quieter. And she said she liked it too, because it hides tears. And I did not ask more, and she did not say more, and that felt right. And after that, she started coming every week, sometimes with a reason, sometimes without. And we talked about small things, the river, the weather, broken things, and never about the past. And I noticed she always came when it rained, and I started waiting for rain, and that scared me, because waiting is dangerous when you are already broken. And one night after she left, I stood in the dark shop and felt my chest hurt, not sharp, just deep, and I knew I was falling into something slow and quiet, and I did not know if I could survive it. But I also knew I did not want to stop, and that was the first time since my wife died that I felt afraid of losing something again, even before having it. The rain stayed for many days after that, and she kept coming, and sometimes she brought coffee and placed it on the table without asking, and I drank it slowly and felt warmth move through me. And she watched me like she wanted to understand how I lived. And I watched her like I wanted to understand why she was still alone. And we never asked the hard questions, but they sat between us like unopened letters. And one evening, the power went out, and the shop became dark, and the rain sounded louder, and I lit a small lamp, and the light was soft, and we sat close without touching, and she said the dark did not scare her, and I said it scared me less than silence. And she nodded, and for the first time she told me her husband died too, not long ago, in an accident, and she said it without crying, and I did not touch her, and she did not look at me, and that made it real. And I told her about my wife, and how the hospital smelled, and how quiet the room was after, and she listened without interrupting. And that felt like someone holding a door open for me. And after that night, something changed, not in a big way, but in small actions. She stayed longer. She asked if I ate. She fixed my collar when it folded wrong, and one time she waited outside the shop when I closed. And we walked along the river together without speaking, and the water moved slow, and the street lights reflected on it. And I felt time stretch, and I wanted to reach for her hand, but I did not, because I was scared of wanting too much. And she did not reach for mine either, and that made me trust her. And weeks passed, and winter came closer, and the rain turned cold. And one day she did not come. And then another day passed, and I felt the old emptiness return, heavy and familiar, and I told myself this was how things end, quietly, without explanation. And then on the fourth day, she came, her eyes tired, her face pale, and she sat down without speaking, and I made tea and placed it in front of her, and she held the cup with both hands like it was the only warm thing left. And after a long time, she said her house felt empty, and she could not sleep. And I nodded because I understood, and I did not try to fix it, and that was important. And she leaned back and closed her eyes, and the rain tapped on the window. And I realized I did not feel alone in that moment. And that scared me more than loneliness ever did, because loneliness is safe. It cannot leave you, but connection can. And one evening, she did not leave, and I did not ask her to, and we sat until late, and the shop felt different, softer. And when she finally stood up, she hesitated, and I saw fear in her face, the same fear I felt. And she touched my arm just for a second and said good night. And that touch stayed with me all night, and I lay awake listening to the rain stop and start again, and I thought about my wife, and felt guilt, and felt relief, and felt confused. And the next morning when I opened the shop, she was waiting outside, and she smiled a small smile, and I opened the door wider than usual. And that day we worked together, fixing watches, cleaning shelves, and she stayed until evening. And when she left, she hugged me, not tight, not long, just enough. And I stood there after she was gone, and felt my hands shake. And I knew I was changing, slowly, quietly, without asking permission. And I did not know if love was coming, or if I was just learning how to breathe again. But either way, I did not want to go back to how things were before. Time kept moving, and the rain came and went, and she became part of my days in a way that did not need explanation. And sometimes she stayed at my place when the weather was bad, and we slept on opposite sides of the bed, not touching, just sharing space. And that felt more intimate than anything I remembered. And one night, she woke from a bad dream, and I sat with her until her breathing slowed. And I did not ask what she saw, and she did not tell me. And that was love, in a quiet form. And weeks later she reached for my hand while we walked. And I let her, and neither of us spoke. And the river flowed beside us, and the city moved around us, and I felt present, fully, and that surprised me. And there were days when she pulled away, when grief returned to her eyes, and I let her have that space, because healing is not a straight line, and she did the same for me when I felt heavy and distant. And one evening she brought a box of old photos, and we sat on the floor and looked at our pasts without jealousy, without fear. And I saw her life before me, and she saw mine, and neither of us tried to replace what was lost, and that made room for something new. And the first time we kissed, it was slow and careful, and afterward we laughed softly, like we had done something brave. And winter came fully, and the rain turned to snow, and the shop stayed warm. And sometimes I caught myself waiting again. But this time it did not scare me, because waiting now had meaning. And one morning I woke up, and she was still asleep beside me, her hand on my arm, and I felt peace, not happiness, not excitement, just peace. And I realized love does not always arrive loud. Sometimes it sits quietly and waits until you are ready to notice it. And when spring came, the river moved faster, and the air changed, and we changed with it. And we did not promise forever. We did not need to. We just stayed, day by day, rain or no rain, silence or words. And that was enough. And when I think about loss now, it still hurts, but it no longer owns me. And when I think about love, I think of small actions, shared space, time passing, and two people choosing each other without saying it out loud. And that is how I learned to live again, not by forgetting the past, but by letting someone walk beside me through the quiet, through the waiting, through the rain. If this story touched your heart, please like the video and subscribe to our channel.